Колеги,
Dear colleagues, we shall continue our working day and we will talk about the weekly updates on the security situation in Ukraine and the activities of the OSCE SMM. And I'm giving the floor to Mr. Alexander Hug, Principal Deputy Chief Monitor of the OSCE SMM.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Last week, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine registered a 20% decrease in the number of recorded ceasefire violations. Although the recorded use of mortars and artillery increased, 137 instances last week compared to 88 the previous week, the use of such Minsk-prescribed weapons is now relatively low compared to early in the year, notably in early February and mid-April. Dear friends, I do not assume to speak on behalf of the people of Eastern Ukraine, but I can tell you what many of those people consistently tell our monitors on a daily basis. They want peace. They are sick and tired of living in fear and danger. They want their lives back. Every week, the number of civilians injured or killed grows. The number of SMM-confirmed civilian casualties since the beginning of the year now stands at 341, 59 killed and 282 injured. And yet, despite the terrible price ordinary people in Donetsk and Luhansk regions are paying, certain people stubbornly insist on perpetuating violence. While violence levels are considerably down compared to February and April, these people refuse to fully implement provisions of the Minsk agreements that would allow for a complete cessation of violence. They refuse, for instance, in contrary to their obligations, to withdraw certain weapon categories. Last week, we observed 43 weapons in violation of the respective withdrawal lines, 24 in government and 19 in non-government controlled areas. Among them were 18 self-propelled howitzers in government-controlled Bakhmut and at least 16 multiple-launch rocket systems southeast of so-called LPR-controlled Minuisk. Of particular interest was a 120mm mortar, one of our unmanned aerial vehicles spotted on 29th of July in the so-called TPR-controlled Trudivsky area of the Petrovsky district in Donetsk city. With residential areas just 300 meters from the mortar, its presence is a direct threat to local residents, as retaliatory fire is inevitable. Mortars and artillery, often used in this conflict, are indirect fire weapons and are inherently imprecise. Even though residents are not necessarily the intended target, they are often the ones at the receiving end. It is no surprise then that we have been recording a lot of civilian casualties in this particular area. 3 civilians killed and 20 injured since 6th May, just in the Trudivsky area. Instead of removing such weapons, the response of the so-called DPR has been to conceal them. Within a few minutes of taking the picture of the mortar in the Trudivsky area, the UAV took another picture showing the mortar had been covered. Concealment takes many forms. Another is to physically prevent the OSCE SMM from entering the Trudivsky area. Since 6th of May, our patrols in the area had been restricted 10 times by the so-called DPR. Sometimes efforts to prevent us from monitoring take a violent form. Just yesterday, at the Donetsk water filtration station located between government-controlled Avdiivka and so-called DPR-controlled Yasinovata, SMM monitors and SMM contracted workers came under small arms fire. The workers had been trying to install a camera on the roof of the filtration station, a development that would allow us to monitor the area on a 24/7 basis. Clearly, certain people do not want this, even to the point where they are prepared to fire upon unarmed civilian monitors and civilian contractors. They fired on these civilians despite the Joint Center for Control and Coordination having previously facilitated security guarantees for a ceasefire within a 15-kilometer radius of the filtration station. Even our unmanned aerial vehicles are not immune. On 20th July, for instance, 17 small arms rounds were fired at the SMM UAV in the Trudisky area. The so-called DPR, of course, does not have a monopoly on placing weapons in and around residential areas. Here, in this image taken by another SMM unmanned aerial vehicle on 20th of July, 2 mortars are identified close to residential areas in government-controlled Pisky. A recent visit to Pisky allowed me and a number of colleagues to meet many of the remaining residents, including Sofia, an 80-year-old woman who lives with her 54-year-old epileptic son. Nobody, least of all such vulnerable people, need mortar rounds impacting on their homes. People living in places where personnel and hardware are positioned know from bitter experience it endangers them. On Wednesday, for instance, our monitor observed as approximately 40 residents of government-controlled Sopine protested against the presence of a dugout in their village. They told our monitors they didn't want their village to be another Shirokine. The people deciding to place personnel, hardware and positions in residential areas also refused to disengage forces even from the 3 agreed pilot areas, namely Stanica Luhanska, Petrivsky and Solote. And they refused to demine, even though they agreed they would. Our unmanned aerial vehicles recorded just such non-compliance on a number of occasions recently. Here, in this image, taken on the 21st of July, near so-called DPR-controlled Lochinovne, you can see anti-tank mines laid across the M03 road between Svetlodarsk and Debaltseve. 2 days earlier, these mines were removed by the so-called DPR, the SMM, for the SMM to access Debaltsevo from Svetlodarsk. Empty gestures made for the benefits of the cameras are, however, not enough. Free movement for unmanned and unarmed civilian monitors need to be permanent, including along the M03 and all other routes. Without it, the verification role ascribed to the SMM, a core part of the Minsk agreements, is difficult, if not impossible. The Ukrainian armed forces, too, have in this respect not fully complied. An SMM unmanned aerial vehicle, for instance, spotted anti-tank mines on a road near government-controlled Vodiane on 19th July. Dear friends, I travel extensively throughout Donbass. In all the times I have been there, my colleagues and I have rarely met a civilian who doesn't want peace. Ordinary people all across Donetsk and Luhansk regions tell me, and indeed the hundreds of other OSCE SMM monitors working there, that they want the sides to fully comply with their commitments, withdraw weapons, disengage hardware and personnel, and demine. Above all, they want the sides to cease fire, and they want them to cease fire now. They know that a relative calm in the absence of compliance with weapons withdrawal and disengagement can be shattered in a matter of minutes. Just ask the residents of Popasna. On Tuesday night, the 1st and 2nd of August, they and SMM monitors based there heard approximately 150 explosions caused by mortar rounds, as well as intense heavy machine gun, small arms, and automatic grenade launcher fire. On the same night, the SMM camera in Girokine recorded a total of 51 outgoing explosions, assessed as multiple launch rocket system fire from east to west, 8 undetermined explosions, and hundreds of tracer rounds and air bursts. Dear friends, so long as there is only partial compliance with the Minsk agreements, so long as weapons remain in place and the sites are in close proximity, such flare-ups are inevitable. Now is the time to comply. Now is the time to withdraw weapons, disengage and demine. Now is the time to cease fire. Now is the time to listen to the people of Donbass. As usual, at the end of my statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 625 monitors, of whom 548 are deployed to the east. In addition, there are 361 Ukrainian colleagues and 94 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. Чи будуть запитання, уточнення?
Crimean News, I have a clarification, not a question. I would like to clarify the camera at the Donetsk filtration station. As far as we understand, while the camera was transported to this side and while the camera was installed, there were impediments. When do you plan to put this camera in full operation unless there are any further impediments?
Thank you. Would there have been no impediments and no ceasefire violation, the camera would already be operating. We do our best to install this camera, but it is up to the sites to enable us to do so. It is their responsibility to ensure the security of these contractors and our colleagues. It is our responsibility to monitor. It is their responsibility to stop firing. And I would like to emphasize that the camera on its own will not stop the ceasefire violations. It is up to the sides to stop firing, to disengage, and to remove their weapons that they have far too close. I've shown you pictures today of these weapons on both sides of the contact line. As long as these weapons are there and we see them on a daily basis, the situation will not change. Thank you.
Ще було запитання, так?
Ще таке запитання.
One more question. A few weeks ago, Mr. Walker was in Avdiivka, U.S. representative. You talked to him. Please, could you tell us what was of particular interest shown from Mr. Walker? Implementation of the Minsk agreements, the moods of the people in Donbass, the ceasefire violations. Could you shed some light on what Mr. Walker was interested to hear from the SMM?
Thank you. I can't speak on behalf of Ambassador Walker. However, I can confirm that the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission met the ambassador and has briefed him on the situation at the contact line and has visited alongside with him one of its observation points at the southern end of the Avdiivka town. Thank you.
Чи будуть ще запитання? Are there any questions from the audience? If none, at this point we end press briefing. Thank you.
Thank you.